Welcome, everybody. For those of you who do not know me, have not met me yet, I thought I'd give you a 1-minute resume. My career spans 35 years, first starting as a sales manager in my father's company, then owning my own company, consulting on business development, and our focus was on building out process-dependent businesses. I've started and sold a company. As an entrepreneur and business owner, I've most likely experienced everything that you have. I've seen it all in my own business and in our consulting. Our company, Business Design Corporation, was started in the early 90s as a consulting company. In the early days and for many years, we were eMyth consultants. Many of you listening to this are probably familiar with Michael Gerber and his eMyth series of business books. But what we found was that the eMyth Mastery Program, the product that we were delivering, was more theoretical than practical. Our clients were not getting their processes documented and implemented. And given that this is the very foundation on which the eMyth theory is built, we decided to focus specifically on that, on process implementation. And in the late 90s, we went to work on a web-based tool called the Touchtone business system. And since then, we've developed into a software company and began offering our services to small businesses like yourself, with the intention of helping you get your processes more organized so you can grow with more consistency, with more reliability, and so you can train and manage your employees with more ease and efficiency. One of the tools we've redesigned is the boring old job description. And in today's presentation, I'm going to show you how a job description can be used as a powerful management tool. A tool not only used for hiring a new employee, but a tool that can be used for training, for managing, and for evaluating an employee. It's really a tool that forms the basis of an entire employee management system. So let's get started. What you're seeing here is the typical job description. This is what most of you listening to this presentation probably think of when I use the term job description. I mean, it's sort of a job description. It's sort of a description of the job. And, it's a gorgeous, high-tech endodontic practice in Saratoga, California, seeking a highly motivated, organized, enthusiastic individual for the position of practice manager, an enduring professional, collaboration with intelligent, blah, blah, blah. It's really nothing more than an advertisement. It's an ad for the position. And it's really used to attract qualified candidates and provide an accurate description of what the job entails. It is essentially a document that you'd put up on the web to hire a new employee using Indeed.com or ZipRecruiter, and it's useful up to the point that a candidate is chosen for the position. But there is little, if any, information that can help an employee accomplish anything. The purpose of this doesn't go much beyond advertising for the position. And now there's nothing wrong with that job description. It's just that it's not that useful. With some modification and a little more attention, it could be so much more. Think of that type of a job description as what we might call an external job description. Today I want to introduce you to a different type of a job description, one that can serve a much more valuable purpose. We could call it an internal job description because it will be part of several internal management procedures. Michael Gerber in the eMyth calls it a position contract. I like to refer to it as a position-specific operating manual. The internal job description is going to be used to establish expectations with your employees. It becomes a tool for performance management. It outlines the agreement or understanding between a manager and their reporting employees, and it defines all of the accountabilities and the responsibilities of an employee filling that position, including the instructions for that employee to be able to achieve what is expected of them. It can be used not only for hiring, but it can be used for training, for holding an employee accountable, for managing an employee, for performance monitoring, performance evaluation. It's useful even after the employee is hired. This is an example of this type of a job description. The client is an electrical, plumbing, and HVAC contractor, and this is their internal job description that they created for their customer service representative. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle over to the actual Word document so that we can see it. It's just a little clearer for the presentation. So we've got the name of the position at the top, then we have a sentence or two that describes the purpose of this position, the expectations that you have of this position, work as a part of a dynamic and passionate team to ensure desired company growth. You book service appointments and do whatever is necessary to promote customer satisfaction and provide exceptional and memorable customer care for an all-encompassing experience. But then you can see that it becomes a list of processes. It defines almost exactly what someone filling that position will be doing. And as you'll see in a moment, when the employee clicks on any one of these processes, like booking a call, for example, the instructions for how to do what needs to be done are displayed. It provides the instructions for that employee to be able to achieve what is expected of them. And as a result, this type of a job description can be used not only for hiring, but for training, accountability, managing, performance evaluation. It can also be used as part of a termination process if necessary. This is the agreement to which an employee is measured. There simply no longer is an excuse. You train and manage them to the processes on their job description, and it's super simple to find what they need so they know how to do what you need them to do. If they're not achieving expectations, they're either not following the processes or they're simply unable to excel in this position. So in today's presentation, I want to talk about how you do this, how you can use this type of a job description for measuring and increasing employee performance and company efficiencies. I mentioned a moment ago that this client's customer service reps can call up their job description and click on a specific process on their job description to access all of the instructions they need to be able to do what needs to be done. This client is using a tool called the Touchtone Business System. Some of you who are listening to this probably already have a subscription to Touchtone, but for those of you who have never heard of the Touchtone Business System, we've developed a web-based application to make it easier to access and implement the processes your employees need to follow. If you've been working on creating a process-dependent business, you probably have already developed an organizational chart which locates specific positions within the organization, who they report to and who reports to them. Then you've probably developed some external job descriptions, and you've probably started identifying and documenting some of your processes. In fact, if you've been working on this for some time, you probably have a whole bunch of processes, and they're probably saved on local drives, in Dropboxes, Google Docs, maybe in printed form. Chances are all of these elements are getting a little disorganized. It's pretty easy for them to get out of control. They become difficult to find and difficult to keep current, and as a result, extremely difficult to actually implement. In today's presentation, I'm going to be using one of our clients as a case study of how to implement your job descriptions. That was, by the way, their customer service representative's job description that I was illustrating earlier. Mainstream is a residential maintenance contractor for electrical, heating, cooling, and plumbing. And the owner has been kind enough to give me permission to use their content and their documentation for today's presentation. They are a Touchtone subscriber, and I will be logging into their Touchtone account to demonstrate how they've been able to gain control over this chaos of having all this content, all these job descriptions and processes all over the place, and actually begin using their job descriptions for training and management. Mainstream came to us a few months ago because they were having a challenge getting their processes implemented. They had an org chart. It was a PowerPoint presentation. They had some external job descriptions. These were written up in Microsoft Word. They also had a bunch of processes documented in Google Docs, and some were actually old PDF files that were printed. They didn't know where the PDF file was any longer, so they had printed manuals. Essentially, they were struggling because everything was all over the place and difficult to find. They subscribed to Touchtone so they could bring this chaos under control, so they could make it easier to get their processes implemented and provide their employees with a very simple way to access the instructions that were used to train them. You don't have to have a Touchtone account to take advantage of the lessons that I'm going to be teaching you in today's presentation. I'm going to use it because it's simply the best application available to integrate these three key elements, the org chart, the job description, and the position's operating procedures. It just really helps to get new employees up to speed quickly, easily, and efficiently. So I'm going to toggle over to Mainstream Electric's Touchtone account and log in. And I'm going to go to the 4 key functions. I'm going to come back to these different areas in a moment, but let's just go here first. I want to mention also that today's presentation is not meant to be a demonstration of the Touchtone business system. At the end of the presentation, we do have an offer for you to get a free trial account so you can see how it will work in your business. But today's presentation is not meant to be a demo of Touchtone. So as I showed you in the previous slide, you are going to need 3 things to effectively train and manage employees. You're going to need your org chart. You're going to need your job descriptions. And you're going to need processes for training your employees. In Touchtone, these are all integrated and linked together, so it just makes it easier. That said, you can do everything that I'm about to show you without using Touchtone. So I'm logged into Mainstream's account, and I'm going to come back to their organization chart. Here's that customer service rep position that I was showing you earlier. The acronym is CSR. If I click on this position, I access the internal job description for that position. Remember, it really is an agreement of understanding between the employee and the manager that these are the tasks and responsibilities that the employee is going to be held accountable to. Again, I like to call it a position-specific operating manual, but it doesn't matter what you call it. What we'll see is that we have the position name at the top, and then we have the objective of the position, or the purpose of the position, what needs to happen and why. So work as a part of a dynamic and passionate team to ensure desired company growth. You book service appointments and do whatever is necessary to promote customer satisfaction and provide exceptional and memorable customer care for an all-encompassing experience. And then you have the work listings, a list of all of the processes that employee filling this position will be trained in and held accountable to. For example, if I come down here to number 7, the after hours protocol. So it says handling the phones after hours. Well, what is the process for after hours protocol? How does someone handle calls that come in after hours? What do you say? Where's the script that can be used? If you need the instructions for how to perform a specific process, you simply click on the process name, and all of the process tools needed for this specific responsibility are available. And in this case, you'll notice there are a couple of work plans and a couple of scripts. If I click on this work plan here, after hours phone protocol, you'll see the step-by-step instructions and expectations that are available to someone who is being trained in or is being held accountable to this process. So rotation begins at 5:30, depending on who has the after-hours phones. Use the instruction below to turn the phones over. So there's literally a hyperlink to a website. Then they do this, they do this, they do this, and they apply. Here are instructions for transferring the phones. You'll use these instructions for training, role-playing, managing, and evaluating the employee in the responsibility of this after-hours call process. Role-playing because they're actually scripts. So when people are answering the phones, we actually have scripts that new employees will study, and then a manager will use them to role-play against them to make sure that the employee is saying approximately what you want them to say. And in this case, we have 2 types of scripts. We've got a script for customers that need service now, and then we've got another script for warranty calls and how do you deal with a warranty call after hours. But all of this information is here and available to the employee so that they can follow it. And the goal, because these instructions are easily available, the goal is to ensure consistency, reliability, and a high level of quality assurance for your company. Management can be difficult when you are hunting around for the processes needed to train an employee, trying to find the right ones, the most current ones. A lot of managers give up or train using partial processes or processes that are no longer even current. And they simply fill in the pieces with showing or talking or having someone shadow another employee. If I was live here in front of you, you'd see me doing air quotes around the words showing or talking or shadowing. Trying to manage people who've been trained only in parts of their process, or if they haven't had very formal training, they've just shadowed another employee, they've learned by watching someone else, and if they have very little to fall back on after they've shadowed, what's going to happen is they're going to start filling in the gaps on their own. They're going to start making it up as they go along, or they're going to be asking other people, not you, the manager, how to do it, and those people figured it out or made it up. And very often they start doing it sort of incorrectly or not exactly as you want it done, different than the standard. And when this happens, it's upsetting. It's upsetting to colleagues. It's upsetting to managers. It's upsetting to owners. It's upsetting to customers. And then you have to retrain. We call this process the tribal method of training, the process of training by talking or shadowing. If we were in small tribes back in the caveman days, we would probably be sharing our processes by singing or chanting. But in today's fast-changing ADD, lack of attention span world, this tribal method of training, it just doesn't work. It's just not fair to criticize an employee and let them know that they're not succeeding when they haven't had adequate training, when the manager has not been held accountable to showing them how to succeed in a tangible way, not just, I told you so. And if there's little, if any, accurate content to return to, if they've forgotten, or if they're confused about what they've been trained in, well, how can you hold them accountable to that? The job description can fill this purpose. Let's jump into how to use that job description as a training tool. There are two types of training. There's new employee training, and then there's ongoing training, or, ongoing training would be holding someone accountable to a process that they're not following or that they're not achieving expectations. And the job description is key for both of those management processes. I'm going to toggle back to that Touchtone account, and let me click on the organization chart and customer service position. For new employee training, the job description, and remember, I'm talking about this type of a job description, an internal job description or a position-specific operating manual, not that external job description that most of you will be familiar with, but this type of a job description, a comprehensive checklist of everything the new employee needs to be trained in. Now, even if none of these processes were actually documented, you now have this list of what this employee is responsible for. And it doesn't take that much effort to get to this point. I would suggest that this is still a super beneficial training tool. This gives you a complete list of everything that you need to teach that new employee, a clear and specific list of what this employee needs to do. Now, if any of these processes are documented, this becomes an even more powerful training checklist, not only on what they need to do, but how they need to do it. You can walk through one process at a time and train them on how to do that work. I mean, you could literally print this out if you want and check off each step as you did it, but in Touchtone you can actually go to the dashboard and I can click. I'm the CSR expert, by the way. That means that's the position name that Mainstream gives the CSR manager. I can click on any of the employees that report to me. So let's say Jamie Mills, for example, and I can see all of the processes that he needs to be trained in. These are all of the processes from his job description. So all I've done is reorganize these processes. Everything you see here is exactly what is here. All I've done is I've put it in a slightly different order. I've ordered them in groups for scripts, for administrative tasks, for training tasks, and ServiceTitan is a CSR project management tool that this type of a company uses to schedule book calls and follow up with calls. But if I'm the CSR expert, I can organize these for every individual in my company, so it's really easy to find what I'm looking for. If I click on any one of these processes, I will see the scripts or the work plans or the process tools and walk through this entire script and role play it with Jamie. And when I feel like he's learned it, I'll just check off here that he's been trained in this process. And I can also include a training note right here, such as how long it took me to train Jamie in this specific process. And I'll speak to this in a moment, or any other note that I choose to write. And then step by step, I walk through and I train him in all of the processes on his job description. Done, done, done. You can now use the job description to check off that you've trained the employee in each specific process that they're responsible for following. Now there's no longer any argument about whether or not the employee has been trained. I mean, I can't tell you how often we hear stories of a manager and an employee that they've had an argument. The employee says, "You never trained me in that." And the manager said, "Yes, I did." But there's no record that the training actually occurred. And so the employee and the manager are sort of left in this place of a stalemate, an unnecessary argument that really should have never happened in the first place. Now you have a record of the completion of that training, and there's no longer an argument. I mean, it sounds simple, right? I mean, it's beautiful when it works that way, and there are always going to be instances when maybe a process hasn't been documented, or it's something that you just did one time and you're not going to bother doing it again, so it's not really a process. And you're, in your mind, you might be saying things like this, but if your mind's going there, let go of those variables and focus on what is consistent. The majority of what all employees do, whether you believe it or not, is rudimentary and consistent. Some of it is more complicated than others based on the work they do or maybe the industry they're in, but the majority of work that an employee does is consistent. Now you can take this step, the training step, even further. And if you're the owner of the business listening to this today, this is incredible. This is paramount to being able to staying profitable when you're growing, when you're in the growth mode. Let's imagine that each of these processes on the job description have been documented. And as a manager, I've paid attention to the process of training my reporting employees, and I now know how long it takes to train an employee in each one of these processes. So for example, it took me maybe 15 minutes to run through the happy call script. I gave the employee another 30 minutes during the day to review it and practice it, and then together we spent another 15 minutes role-playing just to make sure that Jamie got it right. That'd be a total of 30 minutes of my time as Jamie's manager and 60 minutes of his time. One process might take 20 minutes, another process might take several hours, maybe even several days, but when you add up the training time for each of the processes listed on the job description and multiply it by what you pay that position, and then you add in your management time, now you have a very accurate sense of what it's going to cost the company to hire a new employee for this position, for the customer service representative. And you're going to know how long it's going to take to get that new employee up to speed. If I go back to the organization chart, if you're considering hiring a new customer service rep and you're growing the company, think of how valuable this information is. You now know what it's going to cost the company in both time and money to hire a new customer service rep. And once again, the job description is key to this. Additionally, as I'm training this new employee, if I've hired someone and made a mistake, I'm going to see it sooner. If I'm walking them through a step-by-step training of every process, like I showed you. If I hired someone last year and I know it should only take 40 hours to train in all of these processes, and I have a person I'm currently training and they're just not getting it, maybe after 25 or 30 hours, I cut my losses with this new employee early and I save a lot of money. There are some astonishing statistics out there by consultants who have studied this situation, and it is incredibly costly to hire the wrong employee. And according to Brad Smart, who wrote the book called Top Grading, great book, 75% of the time companies are failing at their hiring process. 3 out of 4 employees are mishires. So not only is it incredibly costly to hire the wrong employee, but it's happening 75% of the time. if I can save the company from hiring the wrong employee or from cutting my losses early, I'm going to save them a lot of money. And honestly, I can save the new employee a lot of hassle and a lot of time by letting them go early. They're simply not going to be able to succeed at this job. So the job description can help you gauge whether or not you've got the right person for the position. It makes it tangible. Now let's talk about ongoing training. I'm going to click on the CSR and let's go down to the customer resolution form right here. How to use the job description as a manager ongoing is an important thing to know because it really can become one of your biggest assets. The number one rule that you as a manager need to follow is to stop answering all the questions that continue to interrupt you all day long. When one of your employees, one of your reporting employees comes to you with, how about this, or how do you do that, or I did this yesterday, and if you know the answer to the question is in the process and they're not talking about just a one-off thing, if you know it is a process on their job description, like completing the customer resolution form, for example, you can tell them first to go to that process, see if they can answer the question for themselves. Give them that responsibility. You can let them know that if they can't find the answer in the existing documentation, then they can come back to you and look at it and edit the process documentation together. This is the way that you really innovate and develop the position and its processes, because now you're not just stomping out fires and answering questions all day long. You're taking a few extra minutes, and it's not really that much more time. And you're really putting a solution in place so that the next day another employee doesn't interrupt you yet again and ask you the same bloody question. Or 6 months from now, that employee comes to you and asks you the same question again. That repeat, that interruption, that lack of learning is costing you way more money than it's going to cost you to take a breath and say, okay, let's go into Touchtone, let's look for the answer, and let's look at it together. That's the number one thing. Stop being the answer person. Make your employees responsible for their own job, their own content, their own knowledge. And if it's not in the process, then add it. And make them responsible for keeping the processes current and for innovating and developing the existing processes, for offering suggestions. This is so key. Another way to use the job description as a management tool is for correction. So let's say I have this employee, Jamie, and I notice that he's been following up with customer complaints incorrectly. I can sit down with him in a meeting in front of the documentation. I can let him know that he's making these mistakes. First, I want to tell him what the impact is of making these mistakes. The context of the error, just in case he doesn't understand it. That communication is very important. And then I might say, look, I've trained you in this process, and I could even let him know the date that he was trained in the process. And I can ask him the question, so what's happening? What's going wrong? What's going on with the process? Let's talk about it. Let's go through it together and figure out where you went off or where the process might not be detailed enough. What's going on? So you notice where my tone is here? Let's figure out what's wrong with the process. It's not what's wrong with you, Jamie. I've told you 5 times to do it this way. You never listen to me. Why are you so insubordinate? It's not about making Jamie feel bad or guilty for what he did. And it's also not about me. It's not about why can't I find good employees? Why am I the only one who can do this? Why am I a hopeless trainer? No one else can do it as well as me. No one does what I tell them to do. It's none of that. All that rhetoric that goes on in your mind, drop it. Lay it down once and for all. Use the job description and the processes as your management tool. Help the employee to own the process, to figure out what went wrong and to fix the process. Maybe the process was the source of the problem. This happens because, maybe it was written a year ago and things have changed since then. So now sit down together and look at the process and realize, wow, that is confusing, or that's not clear, or we don't do it that way anymore. I can see how you might misunderstand that, and then you fix it together. Using a job description takes all of that energy out of the management equation. It's no longer personal. It's a conversation about the process. It takes all that emotion and angst out of managing. In fact, it makes managing super easy. You simply have to hold employees accountable to the processes that they agreed to follow. It's no longer about blame. The tone of management changes completely. If you do this once or twice, the employees are going to start getting it. They're going to see that they have to be responsible for the content that is in their job description, and they have to be responsible for following it. The minute a manager changes their tone and makes the employee accountable to what they're responsible for, and it's done in a very tangible way, on a job description, for example, the employee learns something new, and it redirects the whole business in a different direction. It takes time to get there, and it takes time for the employee to get used to it, but it's completely worth it in the end. Okay, let's continue on with management. There are two processes in the general process library, the weekly coaching meetings and the annual performance review. But actually, by the way, what I want to say is that there's a set of processes for each of the key functions in your business in the Touchtone library. So for example, if I went to this section, I could actually go to the process library, and you'll see here that I could put this under human resources. We've got a process for a new employee search. Oops, let me just go all the way down here. I could download a process for a new employee search, for new employee interviewing, for new employee introductions and orientations, for new employee onboarding. There's another process up here for employee benefits management. This would be a good one. Employee surveys, satisfaction surveys, and maybe even a process for employee termination. You can actually download these processes. They're available to you to download and either edit or implement as is. But back to management, I'm going to go back to strategy and management. There are two processes in the general process library. The one-on-one coaching meetings right here, I've already downloaded, that's why it's grayed out, and the employee performance review, the annual employee performance review right here. And I would download those. And these two management processes are going to reinforce the value of using the job description as a management tool. And I will tell you that at the end of today's presentation, if you're interested in these processes, just let me know, because we can run them out to a Word document for you. So the one-on-one meeting and the employee performance review, you can download these into a Touchtone account and then edit them. Let's look at the weekly one-on-one meeting. In the weekly one-on-one coaching process, you as a manager will sit down with each of your employees one-on-one and talk to them about how the job is going. This could be done once a week, could be done twice a month, once a quarter. I would not recommend going longer than once a quarter. In fact, I personally think once a quarter is too much time between meetings. We typically recommend a minimum of once a month, and I really recommend once a week. Anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. It really depends on you. This is going to save you so much time in the long run and minimize the interruptions that are happening. Now, some of you listening to this are probably cringing with the thought of meeting with your reporting employees once weekly, but think of the amount of time that is wasted from miscommunication, poor communication, lack of communication. What it boils down to is email after email after email, and missed emails, and information passing back and forth, and phone calls where you don't really remember what happened, and then questions. Things you talk to them about. So, you have to talk to them about these things. So you pick up the phone and you contact them, and now everyone's being interrupted. Some of this, not all of it, but some of it can wait for the weekly one-on-one coaching meeting. You begin to get more organized with your time. So for example, let's say you need to speak to one of your reporting employees about something. It could be project related, it could be process related, it could be anything. Maybe you've overheard them on a call and want to bring them back to a specific script that they're not following. You can go into your one-on-one meeting form and you can make a note. So you go into your meeting form and you'll make a note of the issue that you want to speak to them about. And then prior to the meeting, you can print this out or review what you've written down. And now you have your agenda for that meeting, what you want to speak to them about. You can work on it with them at your weekly meeting instead of interrupting them right now. Now, obviously, if it's urgent, if it's time sensitive, if it's an emergency, then you're not going to wait for your weekly meeting. You'll bring it up right away. But if it can wait, then wait and stop interrupting your people. Additionally, use the weekly coaching meeting to review the employee's job description. You can ask them things like, how is the outbounding call going? How are you doing? How are you feeling about making these calls? Have you learned anything new this week? You can look at other processes on their job description, and you can acknowledge them for how well they're doing on that specific process. You might acknowledge them and say, hey, you did a great job this week on all of your calls, your booking calls. You did great. You might ask them for input on a specific process or what they think about maybe adding something, for example. It's about communication, and you're focusing in on the processes as you're talking about them. This is how you keep your processes current. It becomes this organic development of the processes to keep them current, to keep people focused on them, and to keep people using them. Another part of the weekly one-on-one is checking in with the employee, asking them about their projects. Do they have any outstanding issues? You can ask them how they're doing. You can let them know that you care about them. But you're reinforcing the job description and their processes. You don't have to go through every process every week, but talk about any issues that they're having with their processes and invite their input on ways to improve them. And as a result, these meetings become very focused. Now, you can also do this kind of thing in a departmental setting. Maybe the entire customer service department, the manager gathers the customer service reps together. Maybe it's a lunch and learn meeting. You pick one specific process that you think needs attention and you break it down. We call this the process of the month exercise. You choose a process from the CSR's job description and you let the CSRs know that as a team, you're all going to focus on it at the process of the month meeting coming up, next Friday afternoon. Ask them to review the existing documentation. Ask them to pay attention to how they're actually performing the process now. Is there anything that they would like to do differently? Ask what people are finding works better. What isn't working well? Are we even still doing it this way? And then you gather as a team, you read through the work plans, you get their input, you communicate your findings, and then you innovate the process by talking about it. One of the things that many of our clients tell us is that after doing something like this, frontline employees feel really appreciated. They talk about how management was actually listening and receiving their input and their contribution. And the culture evolves into one of process and innovation, and employees begin to feel that it's actually a good thing to bring a suggestion and to contribute. There are always people in the organization that are cynical. They're not process focused. They think this is hocus pocus. Maybe they're resistant to this whole idea. Well, suddenly they start getting attracted to this new culture that's developing. They start to see what a good thing it is to bring a suggestion or a question, and they begin to see its value because it soon becomes the way. Also, if you, as the owner, have a question about an employee that reports to one of your managers, so you're managing managers, or if you just want to know that your managers have been having their one-on-one weekly coaching calls with their reporting employees, people can complete processes, and then you can run reports. So we can come back here, and as the CSR manager, I can actually run a management review report, and I can see all of the one-on-one coaching meetings that have been saved for a specific employee or by a specific manager. And for those of you who are HR staff on the call, here's your compliance. If you're dealing with a difficult employee, the weekly one-on-one coaching forums are evidence of your attempts to correct the issue. There are also processes in the Touchtone libraries documenting how and when to issue verbal and written warnings. We're not going to go into that right now, but they are there. just so that you know, if you do need to fire someone, the complete history of all of the communication necessary to justify the action has been saved in your Touchtone account. So in summarizing, encourage your employees to reference their job descriptions and their processes to remember what they need to do. It's just paramount. It's one of the most important things. Make sure you concentrate on that. If you're going to go through all this time and effort to document your processes to become a process-dependent business, you got to use them. You've got to make them part of what you and they do. And it really becomes part of this management process. It's so hugely beneficial when staff are actually using them. And finally, let's talk about the annual performance review. I think this is also a good process to point out at this point because it dovetails so well with job descriptions, with process, and with those weekly coaching meetings. Let's go back to the CSR's job description here, CSR manager, because they do the annual performance review. There is a link to the performance review forms in the work plan of this process. If we actually look at the performance review and open up, Mainstream is a member of an organization specifically for residential electrical, plumbing, and HVAC contractors. The organization is called Nexstar, and they have a library of processes and forms their members can use. And you may have noticed this earlier where we've migrated them into a Touchtone library that Nexstar members can access within their Touchtone accounts. I actually mention this because if you're a member of an organization that has a series of processes, we'd be happy to contact them and see if they're interested in us building a Touchtone library for them. Only Nexstar members can get access to these Nexstar libraries. So you'll notice in step 4 of the work plan, I go back here, that if I was to click on this, it actually goes to their Nexstar network and opens up videos. It's hyperlinked directly to their network. Now, I've already accessed the files from the Nexstar portal, and I've uploaded them into Mainstream's Touchtone account, so I can access them right here. Here's the master review form, and here's the performance review form for a customer service rep. As part of the annual performance review, a manager will open this. You'll notice here it says job description. They'll copy they can go to the organization chart and run this job description out to a Word file, and then they'll copy all of this content into this form right here, and then they'll save it. And what they'll be left with is a form that looks something like this. Go back here. Oops, sorry. Went to the wrong position. Go to the annual performance review. They'll save this, and now they'll have a very detailed evaluation process where they have every work listing from the position's job description or every system that they're accountable for, and they will grade them on a scale of 1 to 5. And then they also have additional information. But basically, all of the content from the CSR's job description is now inserted into this annual performance review form. And each process on the job description can be graded. I mean, after all, if you're doing a performance review, don't you need to review them on each of the processes that they're responsible to perform? I mean, it's sort of common sense, but now there are other pieces to the performance review form, but essentially you're rating the employee on each of their responsibilities or processes that they're expected to follow, the processes from their job description. This is yet another reason why the job description is such a valuable management tool. So as a manager, you'll build a form like this for each of your reporting employees, and then you'll walk through the entire form, grading them using the scale provided. I should say that if you've been having weekly coaching meetings, the annual performance review is simple. There shouldn't be any surprises, and completing the annual performance review should really take no time at all. There's very little to think about because you've been talking about these things and working through these things throughout the weeks and months all through the year. Imagine you hire a new CSR. You know how much it's going to cost the company and how long it takes to train them. You take them through the new employee training checking off each process on their job description as they're trained. You're meeting with them weekly on a one-on-one coaching call. You're sitting down with them and talking about the processes on their job description, how it's going with each of those processes, if there's a problem with anything that they're doing, any of the processes, you can take them back to the work plan or the script, their instructions on how to do what you need them to do. And you can make sure that they remember that it is right here and it's what needs to be done. So if they need to fall back on it, they can come to it. And by the way, this is mobile compliant. They can call it up on their phone and follow along. Now a year goes by and it's time to do their annual performance review. You sit down with the annual performance review form and you have all of the processes. And because you've been sitting with this employee weekly, or maybe it's monthly, for a year paying attention to these things, it'll take maybe 15 or 20 minutes to complete this. You know exactly how they're doing. You know it off the top of your head because you've been talking about it so much. So this is a beautiful thing for any of you who have to do performance evaluations. The worst thing is when you don't know, when you have to try to make something up because you just can't remember. I mean, you've got 4 or 5 customer service reps that you need to review. You can probably remember what's been happening in the recent past, the last few weeks, but this is an annual performance review. It's hard to remember the specifics of what's been happening. And sometimes you'll just make stuff up. And that is the absolute worst thing. You write a comment, something that you've made up, and the employee asks you a question about it, and you don't really have an answer because it was something that you thought instinctually, you had a gut feeling, you kind of made it up. Maybe you had this feeling, but you can't specifically say what happened. Having used the job description all year long, having focused meetings with the reporting employee on these processes that appear on their job description, completing a performance evaluation form is quick, it's easy, and the best part, there's no surprises. The employee's not going to be surprised because you've already been talking to them about it. If there's an issue, you've already been focusing on it, on how to resolve it. In fact, it should already be resolved. So that just about wraps it up. What I want to say is, as a next step, consider taking some action. Make this last hour that you've spent, or 45 minutes or so, make it count. How many times have you watched a valuable presentation and you've got, wow, I'll think about that, and you've gone back to work and you get carried away with the day, and then several days or weeks pass and you do nothing. And by then, you can't even remember the value that you experienced. So you do nothing and nothing ever changes. Well, let's do something. You can get started immediately. You can register for a free trial of Touchtone. Just text. See right here? Here's the number, 707-800-3603. Text "try it free" to this number. Also, you'll notice at the bottom there's a link. There's a box underneath this video, and there should be a link there that you can click on to sign up on a form. But the easiest way is just text "try it free" to this number. This will automatically set up an account for you. There's no need to enter a credit card. You're going to get a 14-day free trial. You're going to get an ebook on how to systemize your business, where we will walk you through this process in a step-by-step fashion. You'll gain access to our library of general processes, as well as instructions on which processes to download, the ones that I've talked about today, which ones to download from the library and how to edit them. You'll work with one of our process engineers to get you familiar with how to use the application. And there's no commitment. Play with it for 2 weeks. And if it's working for you, you can keep it. Touchtone is $149 per month on a month-by-month basis. You can stop at any time. There's no support fee. There's no setup fee. There's no term agreement. You can stop at any time, and you can offload any of the work that you've created, and you never have to pay for anything. If you're interested in getting a free trial, text "try it free" to 707-800-3603, or there should be a link in that YouTube box. So you can click on that link, complete the form, and your account will be created for you, and login instructions will be emailed to you. So that's it. I want to say thank you for joining me today. I hope you found the information to be valuable and useful. If you have any questions, please reach out to me. My name is Michael Mills. My email address is mmills@businessdesigncorp.com. 707-522-6253 is my direct line. And if you visit businessdesigncorp.com, there is a ton of free information available to you. So feel free to visit us online anytime. I thank you very much for joining us. Thank you. Bye-bye now.